All right. So last thing today, I want to explain A4, and then I'm going to give you some time to work on it. So A4 is what I call advanced calculator, and it's not really advanced in that it's more difficult. It's advanced in that it lets you choose between two calculators. So in the same sense that we had a calculator program before, where you could maybe, let's say you calculate the conversion from Fahrenheit to Celsius before. Now you're going to let the user choose. Do you want to convert from Fahrenheit to Celsius or from Celsius to Fahrenheit? Let me finish, and then if you still have a question, I'll get to you. Oh, okay. Looked like you were. All right. So you want to build two calculators into one program, and you're going to give the user a choice. Which one do you want to use? This one or that one? And then what you're going to do is once they choose, then you're going to ask them for their input and do the calculations and give them the results. Okay? And that will be the end of the program. The other thing I want you to think about on this program is how can I make it look nicer? How can I use some of those user interface guidelines that we've been talking about to make the program more usable, nicer looking, more fun to interact with? Fun is important too, right? Never underestimate the value of fun in creating a good, usable program. So the way this might look, if I'm going to flow chart this, and if you're a visual thinker, this might be a good method for you to think about using when you're creating a more complicated program that's got menus and choices and things like that. I use it all the time. I just take a piece of paper, or sometimes I like to use the computer, and I just sort of sketch out, how does this look? So in this program, you're going to have a main menu. That main menu is going to offer two choices. You want this calculator or that calculator. Based on their choice, which is going to be an if, else statement, let's say they choose choice number one, Fahrenheit to Celsius, right? So once they choose that, you're going to say, please input the degrees in Fahrenheit. You'll do the calculation and you'll say the degrees in Celsius for that degrees Fahrenheit are whatever. If they choose option two, then you're going to do the same thing, but you're going to do it for that calculation, which is get input, do the calculation, output the results. So everything they see here is going to be different than everything they see here. So you're going to have to write multiple lines of code in each block of that if statement. Now, what I'd also like to do as part of the user interface guideline is if you offer them a choice between 1 and 2 or A and B or whatever, if they enter something that is not one of those, then you want to give them a message that says, that wasn't one of the choices. Okay? Now, ideally, in a good program, in a really more robust program, you would say something like, that's not one of the choices, please try again. And you'd go back to that main menu and say, here are the choices. For this program, at this point in time, we're not going to do that. We're just going to terminate the program after telling them you chose poorly. Okay? And they in this scenario, they would just rerun the program. Now, nobody in the real world is going to release a program that works that way, but that's where we're at right now. As of next week, you'll be able to ask them an infinite number of times what they want to do. But today, we're just going to end the program. So they're going to choose choice one, choice two, or they're going to put in something other than choice one or two. And if in your mind, you should already be thinking if, elif, else, right? So if input equals 1 or A or whatever you decide, then do this. If input equals number 2 or B or whatever you decide, then this. Else, tell them that you don't understand their choice. Okay? If, elif, else. So you should start to see how this program is put together now. So this method of drawing this out is very visually helpful for me, because sometimes, and later on in the class you will have this, you'll choose choice one and then there'll be more choices, right? Because that's how real programs work. It's almost never this simple. But when you get into real programs that have choices after choices after choices, your flowchart looks pretty big and complicated. But guess what? Once you have this mapped out, then you know what you need to do. You can just work out each part of it as a smaller individual problem, and then you put it together and it works. So that's where we're going with this. So tips for A4. Don't forget, you need to use comments in your code. Some of you are still leaving those out. I try to remind you, but it's important for the purpose of being a good programmer, but it's also important for this class because it helps me understand what it is you're thinking when you write certain code. It helps me figure it out. And sometimes if you get it wrong and your comments help me understand why you got it wrong, then I can give you better feedback. So that helps me to help you. But in this case, what I'm going to suggest is maybe you want to write the structure using comments first and then fill in the code. I'm going to show you that in just a second. So I want you to work from the big idea to the specifics. So that's another great programming principle, or anytime you design anything. Think about the big picture and then go back in and fill in the details. Test your program as you go. Remember, if you have to leave a branch of code without a block of indented code underneath it, you can simply use the word pass. Leave yourself some white space, just a personal preference, but I think it's easier to see what's going on with some white space. And just a friendly reminder here, 3 weeks into the class, as things get more difficult or complicated, you might be feeling overwhelmed. Do yourself a favor and don't start copying code from Google or Chegg or ChatGPT to help you fix your problems. Struggle through the code, learn this stuff, because later on you'll thank me for that, and you'll be a programmer who not only passes a class but actually knows how to program. So go figure. So let's take a look at what it looks like to go comments first and from big to specific. So what I'm talking about is I'm going to write this. I'm going to write out kind of what my plan is in comments, and then I just go back and fill it in. So let's say I welcome the user, and then maybe I show the user interface, and then maybe I ask the user to choose an option. If they choose option 1, if they choose option 2, if they don't choose 1 or 2. Okay, so already, this is the big picture, right? I'm already doing the big picture that I just showed you right here. Okay, so show the main menu if they choose option 1, if they choose option 2, if they choose anything else. So there's that. So if they choose option 1, ask the user for input. And if it helps you, you can indent your comments too, because this will be indented part of the code here. And then do calculation, and then print results. And then guess what I can do, because option 2 is the same basic stuff, but just a little different. Here's a little shortcut. If you highlight multiple lines of code to indent and you hit tab, it'll indent them all at once. And if you hit shift tab, it'll unindent them one space. That's nice. You can also, by the way, comment and uncomment code that way. If I hit control / or control / again, it toggles comments off and on for multiple lines. That's very handy. Okay, and if they don't choose 1 or 2, then I'm going to tell them bad input, and the program will end by itself. I don't need to say end program because once it runs out of code to run, that's it. So now I've outlined the entire program, and all we have to do is fill in the thing. So welcoming the user, showing the user interface, asking the user to choose an option. There's an input statement here with a variable attached to it. Don't forget, everything a user inputs after an input statement is what data type? Always a string. Okay, don't forget that, because if you're having them enter 1 or 2, it's still a string. You can either convert it to an int and compare it to an int, or you can leave it a string and compare it to a string. Just remember what it is. So if they choose option 1, this is where the if statement goes, obviously. Then I'm going to ask for user input, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we have if, and then we have the elif right here. And if we have else down here. Now, here's a common mistake that I see people make. I'm just going to mention it really quick to help you avoid it, hopefully. A lot of people will say if they choose 1, and then they'll use another if here, if they choose 2, and they'll say if they don't choose either. Number 1, you're making it overly complicated for yourself. But number 2, if you use if and if, then those are 2 separate forks in the road, which technically could both be chosen, and you don't want that in your program. You really want a single fork in the road with 3 options, and this is how you do it: if, elif, else. So this program right here should use only one if statement. Okay, one branch.